It started in the summer of 2018. We were on vacation in July and I started not feeling well. One evening, I experienced the worst chills, and no matter how many blankets I put on, I could not get warm. I also noticed that my face and neck were slightly swollen. The next day, I went to an urgent care center where the doctor diagnosed me with a sinus infection and prescribed antibiotics. We returned home from vacation and the sinus infection was not clearing up. I made an appointment with my PCP who prescribed more antibiotics and ordered a CT scan of my head. The results were clear. A couple of weeks later, and still feeling pressure in my head, I returned to my PCP. I was informed that since the antibiotics had not worked, I should go to an emergency room where they could give me an IV antibiotics to fight the infection. In the emergency room, I received 3 antibiotic infusions and was instructed to follow up with an ENT specialist. The ENT specialist recommended I see an allergist. At the appointment with the allergist, I described my symptoms. By this time, the swelling in my neck was more pronounced. My eyes were very swollen every morning, and there was significant swelling in my armpit. The allergist assessed me and immediately said that my symptoms were not allergy related and that I needed to see an internist. I waited in the examination room while he went and made arrangements for me to see someone right away. This was a little alarming. I was then examined by an internist who referred me for the CT scan of my chest. A week later, I went in for the test. After my appointment, my husband and I went to have breakfast. While we were sitting in the restaurant, I received a call from the hospital. The caller was a specialist who informed me the CT scans showed I had blood clots and that I needed to go to the emergency room immediately so that they could start me on blood thinners. We went home to pack a bag since I was told I would be admitted. At the hospital, more tests were conducted, a full body ultrasound, another CT scan. We were informed that evening that I had a mass in my chest that was putting pressure on my aorta. It was later explained to us that I had a mediastinal mass or tumor and that further testing was needed to determine if the mass was cancerous. The days following that diagnosis was a whirlwind of different specialists who were asked to consult on my case. A biopsy of the mass was needed, but the mass was dangerously close to my heart, so there was concern with safely performing the procedure. A cardiovascular surgeon described potentially removing the mass surgically. An oncologist came in to discuss radiation and chemotherapy. A week later, it was determined that an interventional radiologist would complete a CT-guided biopsy, which confirmed the 9mm mass was cancerous, and I had stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. On the morning, the same resident who in the emergency room told me I had a mass in my chest came to deliver the biopsy results. God took the situation into his hands. Since my husband was in the room, the resident broke the news to him. I didn't realize it at the time, but I believe that God didn't want a cold stranger delivering the horrible news to me. Instead, he used my husband, who told me the results, but also consoled me as we both cried, unsure of what the diagnosis meant. An oncologist took over my case. When my husband started to ask her a question with if the chemotherapy works, she quickly corrected him, saying when, not if. Her words gave us hope. She explained to us that I would need chemotherapy and a PICC line would be inserted in my arm through which the chemotherapy would be administered. I also needed a bone marrow biopsy to confirm there was no spread. Chemotherapy would consist of 6 treatments, each lasting 5 days while admitted into the hospital. So I was in the hospital for a week, then home for 2 weeks before the next session. Afterwards, I was taken to a surgical suite to have the procedures performed. It was explained to me what each procedure would entail. I was consumed with fear and anxiety. One technician asked me if I wanted to hear some music. I could not think properly, so I responded, it didn't matter. When the music started playing in the room, it was a Christian song that was very familiar to me. I knew then that God was telling me I was not alone. The bone marrow biopsy showed no signs of spread, and we praise God for those results. My first chemotherapy treatment started right away. During the first admission and each one that followed, I spent the hours that I couldn't sleep at night talking to God. I could always feel His presence with me. I went home 2 weeks after I had entered the emergency room, having completed my first run of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy took its toll on me. On one occasion, I fainted in the shower at home, requiring my husband to drag me out of the shower, and again at the clinic while a nurse was changing the dressing around my PICC line. During one unscheduled dressing change, I was overwhelmed and started to cry. To my surprise, the nurse started talking to me about Jesus and how much God loved me. I couldn't believe it. God had placed this nurse there at that time to let me know He saw me and what I was going through. Chemotherapy also caused anemia, mouth sores, and total hair loss. After my third treatment on Thanksgiving Day, I was feeling especially weak. That evening, with my house full of family members who brought Thanksgiving to me because I didn't have the strength to leave the house, I left to go to the emergency room because I developed a fever. My red blood cells were not recovering from the last treatment, so I had what's called a neutropenic fever. I needed a blood transfusion to help me recover, which meant another week in a hospital. I went in for my last treatment on my 50th birthday. Not exactly how I had planned to celebrate that milestone, but it wasn't about my plan. At the end of my treatment, 3.5 months after it began, I had received a total of 600 hours of chemotherapy. When I was weakest, God made sure I knew He was with me. On February 6, 2019, I received the news that I was in remission. I can't say that my journey was easy, but I can say that I was never alone.